Welcome to the Grinnell Historical Museum.
I'm Doug Cameron, and some of you may recognize me, but not with my mask on, from working the school store at Davis School. I also had probably your parents and grandparents in school somewhere if they went to school in Grinnell. And I'm not as old as this house, though.
And I'm Bill Hammond.
Bill, you had a jewelry store, didn't you?
I did, but yeah, I'm retired.
And I'm Frank Schultz, and again, we'd like to thank you for being part of our look at the Grinnell Historical Museum.
Okay.
Grinnell Historical Museum is a building that was built in 1894. 1894 is a long time ago, even before Doug was born, as he mentioned. As you can see, we're practicing social distancing and we are wearing our masks. As we tour the museum with our virtual tour, we're going to remove our masks, but we're going to continue to do social distancing. Behind the camera is our good friend Sherry Wallace, who's also that masked woman behind the camera. Over here on this side, you see an unusual shaped box. This box carried a bicycle all over the United States that belonged to Fred Spalding, and the Spalding Company, of course, was very important in the early history of Grinnell, and Fred would ride competitively throughout the United States. Here we have a very large desk with very deep drawers. That was at the Monroe Hotel, which was on the east side of Central Park. This desk was moved by Bill and I, and we don't want to move it again. Mr. Cameron is going to continue our tour, and he's going to talk about the founder of Grinnell. At this time, we'll be practicing social distancing and removing our masks.
Mrs. Wallace is attempting not to laugh at my hat, but this is the kind of hat that J.B. Grinnell would have worn back in 1854 or so when he first came to Grinnell. This behind me is a picture of J.B. Grinnell, founder of Grinnell, and whose name we take. And a lot of people think that where we are now is where he lived. That is not true. This house was built in 1894, as Mr. Schultz said, and it was built by the McMurrays, who ran a dry goods or a clothing store in Grinnell. And we're only the third owners of this house because when the McMurrays died, they gave the house to their housekeeper, Kate Seal. And then the Historical Museum bought it from her estate after she passed away. Right here is a podium that we just got from the Congregational Church, which is at the corner of 4th and Broad. And J.B. Grinnell would have spoken from this podium when he came to Grinnell. It was found in the basement of that church, and they donated it to the museum. The books are books written by Dan Kaiser about African American families that lived in Grinnell, which can be purchased online, I believe, or at the Grinnell College bookstore when it opens.
I ignore it too.
You gotta keep the hat on.
Yeah. Getting in the mood of things here, I'm still keeping my hat on. This would have been the parlor of JB's, or McMurray's house, excuse me, and where people would have waited to greet the McMurrays when they came to visit. Behind me is J.B. Grinnell's desk, and it's a very fancy desk. It's called the Wotan Desk. It was built by the Wotan Company, and I find it very interesting and amazing that we're still sitting or standing near this desk that J.B. Grinnell would have actually worked at. It's a beautiful old desk, lots of little drawers and pockets and cubby holes, as you can see.
We're going upstairs, or are we doing the clocks? Clocks are next.
Oh, clocks are next?
Yeah,
Okay.
do clocks and then we'll do the carriage.
Okay, we'll come and talk about
Makes
this
sense.
clock.
Do ground floor first.
Taking off my hat now. This is a cool hat, by the way. Hey, Bill,
Yeah.
you need a hat.
Do I need a hat?
Yeah.
Okay. I got a pretty big head. I don't know if these will
In
fit me.
addition to coronavirus, we're gonna pass lice.
Okay. Go. 150 years ago, time was not all that important to people. They knew if the sun was overhead, it was probably noon. They could look at a fence post and see the shadow and figure that it was around 2 o'clock. Well, the railroad companies had to get more exacting time established. So the Chicago Northwestern Railroad spent a lot of money and used the best engineers to build one of the most accurate clocks possible, and it was located in Chicago. One of the reasons they had to have accurate time was trains were running down the tracks, and you had a northbound train and you had a eastbound train, and you didn't want them running into each other, so they had to know exactly what time it was to the minute. Well, once they established this, they had every town along the railroad figure out a way to develop exact time. And how they did it was they used a clock like this here that was located in the town. It was called a regulator clock. And then the conductor would get off the train every day, go and check this clock for time and make sure it was on the exact minute. And if needed to be speeded up or slowed down, he would do it. Well, then everybody in town knew exactly what time it was. This clock was located at the old stone church in Grinnell, and that was a main central building in town where all the meetings were held. And so if you wanted to know exactly what time it is, you would go to the old stone church and look at this clock, and you would know exactly what time it was to the minute.
Go ahead.
This clock here is what was called a kitchen clock. And naturally it would have been found in the kitchen. The main thing that it did is it actually had an alarm on it. And you could turn the alarm for, say 2 hours or an hour and 15 minutes, whatever it took to bake that cake. And when the alarm went off, that was how you knew the cake was done. This clock would have been made approximately 1910.
Hey, what's that thing over there? What do you think, Bill?
I think it looks like a porta potty.
A porta potty? I think it looks like something for storage. You store stuff in there, you know, like ramen stuff. It's actually a cooker, isn't it?
Yeah, like a pressure cooker.
No, it's
We're having a little trouble figuring what this thing is.
I
would
think you
guess
put
porta
stuff.
potty.
I think you put coals in the bottom of it, and then you cooked all day long in it. So it's like a slow
A
cooker.
warmer.
A
Yeah.
slow cooker.
Okay, it's not a potty after all.
It's not a porta potty. Bill, get your mind out of the potty.
okay.
And while we're over here in this general area, I'm gonna try not to drop this and spill them all over because they're really old. Back in 1882, a cyclone, what we know as a tornado now, went through Grinnell. And this was one of the surviving things from the cyclone. It's a jar of actual preserves, which we're not gonna try because they probably taste bad after 100 and some years. So we're not gonna do this. Now Bill is gonna talk about something that you use every day, but it doesn't look the same today as it did back a long time ago.
I'm trying, and we got a phone book from 1953. I'm trying to look up Frank Schultz's number in it, and I'm not finding it. Frank, oh, let's see here.
There's no C, Bill. There's no C.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking for.
So
Yeah.
is this thing we're talking about? Is it a computer or what is it? Because
Yeah, well,
we use computers.
What do you?
every day.
Well, I'll
If
tell
he
you
has a
what,
phone book,
A phone book. Oh,
Okay,
might be
well,
a phone.
so does it look like this then? I don't-
no.
okay, there's a
Doesn't look
Carrie
like this.
Schultz and a Donald Schultz.
Neither one.
Neither one? Well, anyway, As I'm looking in the phone book here, I'm seeing numbers, number 189, and Malcolm Jewelers is number 389. Well, early telephones like this here did not have a dial. You would not dial. You would pick the phone up, you would ring it, you would call the operator and say, "Operator, give me phone number 189." And then they would dial that number. And then you could go ahead and talk on the telephone. And of course, when you were done, you would hang up. Now, back in really, particularly out on the farm, you have what was called party lines. And they would, the party line would have probably anywhere from 10 to 15 people on that telephone line. And they would recognize who they were, who was dialing by the ring. In other words, your ring on that party line might have been 2 short. And so you knew that call was going to you. Now, what anybody could do on that party line, though, is you would, wasn't your call, but you could pick it up and you would listen and you get all the gossip of everybody on that party line.
So it's kind of like the internet then.
Kind of like the internet. So yeah, this could be some kind of a computer.
Early form of internet.
But it was one way that you could actually talk across the country. And now these were start in the very early 1900s. In fact, some in the late 1890s, the first telephones were being introduced. This one here probably goes back to about 1905, 1910. And one of the very early telephones in Grinnell.
Okay.
Grinnell was noted for manufacturing of several different objects. One of the things that you can see is there was a Grinnell refrigerator company. There was a Grinnell washing machine company. There was a Grinnell dairy, which was purchased by the Langs, I believe, and Lang Dairy. And also, one of the things Grinnell was noted for in early days was the creation of some wonderful buggies. Here's an example of the buggy right here that you might have been able to purchase from the Spalding Company. Bill now is going to show us our carriage.
Okay.
Okay, the Spalding Company, and many of the buildings are still standing here in Grinnell, a lot of the factory buildings. Spalding manufactured thousands, in fact, well over 10,000 buggies and many, many different styles of them. The museum here has, we have a nice collection of many different types. This one here is called a Surrey. And the Surrey would have been more of a family model. It would have been the fancy buggy. If you had wanted to take a girl out on a date and impress her, you would give her a ride in the Surrey. This one here has been lovingly restored by the Amish. It is still roadworthy, and they're interesting. If you'll notice that this one has a front and back seat to it. Thing I find interesting on them.
Don't tip it over, Bill.
It won't tip over. they don't. There's not a lot of room up in these buggies. And so I kind of think that people back in the 1890s weren't quite as large as we are right now. And in the back seat, it was common to get 3 people into it. I'm impressed. If you have a lady in the 1890s and the ladies wore long flowing skirts and you've got just very limited room around these wheels and you've got a team of nervous horses up front and how they could gracefully get in and out of these buggies. I don't have a skirt on and it's hard for me to gracefully get in
You're
and
just
out
old,
of
Bill.
Yeah.
I'm old, I know it. I'll go with that. Couple of features that are kind of fun on this is that the lamps are original. They are kerosene lamps, and that's what they would have used for headlights back in the day.
Ducks and geese and sheep better scurry when I take you out in the Surrey with the fringe on
Fringe.
top.
on
You are
top.
really old, Frank. There's not a lot of us that would remember where that came from.
From the musical Oklahoma.
I guess we're all kind of older.
Okay.
Grinnell Historical Museum actually owns quite a few carriages. In fact, Bill took one of the carriages that was in pretty rough shape, and he restored that 2 summers ago, I believe it was. And it's also a beautiful carriage, but we decided not to haul that one out today because it's kind of a pain in the neck to haul this carriage out of the garage.
Well, and the fun thing too is if you want to ever view these carriages, we've got several here at the Transportation Museum downtown. The City Hall has several carriages on display that we are in possession of. I'm showing them off.
They have a big horsey too.
Is there a big horse down
There's a
there?
big horsey.
Okay. Very good.
Grinnell Historical Museum has a very large collection of antique toys and various activities that children might have participated in. For instance, up on the wall is some fabulous paper dolls. And my wife tells me that when she was a little girl, she loved to have paper dolls. There are also dolls that have been imported from other countries. So these would be like some Japanese dolls here and various sizes of dolls. Also, in our museum, you can also see that there are games and other activities as well as dolls. So up on the wall and on the table, you can see some games, activities. And then, of course, any museum worth its salt would have some really spooky looking dolls. And so this is our spooky looking doll here at Grinnell Historical Museum. I'll let Sherry just kind of pan around the room and look at all of the rest of the dolls and various things that we have here in our museum. These are neat dolls, aren't they, Sherry?
They are quite a
Yeah.
variety.
What a variety of dolls, you know.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and then there's ball gloves that have been nailed to the wall and all kinds of other things here.
And of course, in those days, there wasn't much to play with.
No,
So-
but these dolls were well taken care of, as you can see, because they're all in really good shape,
Right.
though occasionally a little spooky. Rat-a-tat drum right there.
Mm-hmm.
By
And the
Kewpie.
Kewpie band.
Yeah, I know, isn't that neat? Kewpie dolls were little dolls, weren't they?
They
I don't
were.
know too much
Yeah.
about them. You probably know more than I.
Racine,
Sure.
Wisconsin, I think, was the first.
Oh, really?
Parcheesi.
Mm-hmm.
Headless Tommy.
Ooh, that sounds kind of spooky. doesn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Headless Tommy.
Children's morality game. And this tea set.
In that
It's
case,
lovely.
That
Yes.
is really neat.
And a little tea table and the little chairs too. And then more of the tea set over here. Child's chair.
Lots of those. And then a Ouija board. You gotta have your Ouija board there,
Where's the Ouija?
right underneath the table.
Oh my gosh. Okay, a Ouija board. Yes.
Did you get a shot of this
I did not.
wonderful little costume right here?
I did
We
not.
have many, many, many items of clothing that have been donated to the museum. I think you showed some of them downstairs, some of the coats that
Right.
we have
Right.
before Mr. Cameron spoke. And then this is just a delightful
look at the
little,
detail.
little girl's outfit.
Dress
Yeah,
coat.
coat.
Yeah. Vest. Moth eaten, of course, because
Well,
that
that's
was a hazard.
Mm-hmm. That's neat. Okay.
Carved wooden animals. Okay.
Many of the items in our museum have labels on them. So for instance, this chest right here has this label on it which says, this chest was brought to Iowa in 1907 from her home in Stavanger, Norway by Mrs. Inger Larsen, maternal grandmother of Ida Bernson. And it was donated to the museum in 1969. This beautiful artwork on the top of the chest. Can you imagine it coming across on the bottom of a ship and then being able to reclaim it and find it? And so inside that chest probably would have been almost all of Inger Larsen's worldly goods. Let's see if this little door opens. And there would be her treasures there. What a wonderful chest. Of course, Grinnell Historical Museum has many, many things on second floor because we're a two-story museum, and we have a basement that's clear full of military items and also business items from the various businesses in Grinnell. One of the businesses that is no longer in existence in Grinnell was called Cunningham's Drugs. And when the Cunningham drugstore went out of business, Jim Cunningham donated all of the beautiful bottle displays that he had of unusual medications. So I'd like to show those to you at this time. All kinds of unusual medications. For instance, this is called BBB Blood Balm. I don't know if it's good for your blood or if you have to leak some blood to use this stuff. I'm not sure which it is. But a doctor might put this on their head. We have some stethoscopes. And then, of course, we have our own ceramic bedpan. Okay, one of the things that happened with earlier in the history of Grinnell was a polio epidemic, and it was also a virus as well as the coronavirus that we're all dealing with now. And so this was a quarantine sign that might have been on someone's house during the polio scare of the 1950s, 1940s, 1930s, and also here's a chickenpox sign. Of course, when you're in the hospital now, when you're a young person, you're given a shot that takes care of diphtheria, whooping cough, lots of other diseases, including chickenpox. So this is our room that was probably a smoking room at one time, and now it's used as our room that has cameras and other displays in it. Okay, what do you think these are? So we were just talking about polio, and one of the things that polio did was affect your legs or your arms or your lungs, lots of times your lungs. So these were early crutches that perhaps a young person might have used.
Okay.
As I've been walking around maintaining my social distance while Frank talks, I couldn't resist talking about these. They're beautiful artwork, but they're a little, you might consider them gross, but they're really not.
I think the word creepy comes into mind.
Creepy, maybe.
Creepy, yeah.
Morbid.
When they, when young people died, especially young girls and women, back in the around the early 1900s, late 1800s, they would weave these beautiful wreaths out of their hair. They would cut their hair and make designs and little wreaths out of them, and in this case a big wreath. And I just find that a little fascinating. We don't do it anymore.
There's a picture too.
Yeah.
Is
Hey,
this-
Bill, play us some music on that piano there, will you?
This one won't make a very good sound. This piano is not really a piano.
But it's been all over the world.
It's been all over the world. We had a woman here in town who was a concert pianist that traveled all over the world playing. And at nights in the hotels, she would practice her music on this. And but it never made a sound. It was all it was good for was for her to practice.
So there's no strings?
There's
or
no
sound
strings,
bar
there's no
board?
nothing in it. It just has action on it that would replicate a piano, so she could practice without making any noise.
And how do you think she knew that she was hitting the right notes? Ah, tough question.
Well,
She was a concert pianist.
Okay, got it. I'm not a musician.
Okay.
One of the things that was unusual about this house when it was built in 1894 is that it included an indoor outhouse. This bathroom was one of the very first bathrooms that was installed in a home in Grinnell. And look at this beautiful subway tile. Your parents would love to have subway tile in their kitchen or in their bathroom. Also, you can see that we had radiant heat, so we have radiators. It's not very warm right now. Over here we have this really quite large sink. And I can remember my grandfather, he'd put a piece of soap down in a cup that looked like this, put a little hot water on it, and he'd stir and stir and stir and stir and stir until he made some foam. Then he'd put that on his face, and that's how he would shave in the morning. But when he shaved, he would use, instead of a safety razor or an electric razor, he would use a straight razor like this. Now this unusual looking piece of leather right here actually was used to sharpen, it was called a strop, and it was used to sharpen the blade. And I've always wondered how tall the people were who could see in this mirror right here that is like 6 foot high. So I don't know who could see in that mirror, but I know that I can't very well. And then over here, of course, we have the commode. Unfortunately, this toilet does not work. I checked with German to see if we could get it fixed. It was going to cost a fortune. So we just admire it from afar. One of the really cool things about an older home is the stairway. And in this case, this beautiful oak stairway is original to the building. And a story that goes with that is there would always be one of these newels, which is this is a newel post, and one of these newels would be removable. You can see that there is, in the past, not been any glue or anything on that, and you'd put your house payment down in there, and that's where you would keep your house payment until it was time to pay the bill each month.
Interesting. Beautiful. Okay.
Over 100 years ago, there was no telephones, you had no cell phone, you had no radio, you had no TV.
Can I use my MP3 player for this?
Well, this is the closest that they had back then, and I'm going to get to that. But anyway, if you wanted to listen to music or anything, what you would do is you probably gather on your front porch and sing. And if you wanted to hear your favorite band, you would have had to go to the big city and listen to it in a concert hall. Well, Thomas Edison invented what they called the talking machine in the late 1890s, or in the 1890s. And a different company started developing the idea. Victor company created their own version of the Victrola. And this one is made in 1906. So it was amazing back at the time, because all of a sudden, in the early 1900s, you could listen to your favorite orchestra or your favorite band and bring it right to your living room. And how this machine worked is, because there was no electricity, so this machine doesn't use any electricity, but the first thing you had to do to it is you had to wind it up You had to crank it up like this. And then the next thing is you would open the doors in front, and this was your volume control. If you wanted it loud, you would open the doors wide open. And then you would put on your favorite record. Now, we are old people here. We know what records are, but a lot of people don't. And this is what a record is. And I talked to my grandson, and he had no clue what I was talking to about a record. So anyway, with this, you could take and start your music like this, and right down here. So back in 1906, this would have been amazing. And this was the MP3 of 1906. And you would buy records, you would collect them, and a lot of people developed hundreds of them, and of records. And their playlist would have been stacking the records. Okay. The year is 1870. And if you want to be the most popular person in town, you would want to be invited to every party in town. Learn how to play one of these, because you would be invited because you created the music for the party. This here is a parlor organ, and it would have been found in many old Victorian homes in town. This one here actually works. And so, like I said, I'm not a good player, but I will play. And there's well, this is how it goes. You had to crank it. You had to crank it with your foot and feet pedal. Now, there's an old saying. Pull all the stops. Well, what that basically means, pulling all the stops means give it all you got. Well, these on the organ are stops. And the more you pull out on these stops, the louder the organ gets, and all the more the sounds it makes.
I think I'll have you play for my funeral, Bill.
Wait, really? I can get some minor chords going.
That's
Well, this concludes our tour of the Historical Museum. We hope all the third graders and anybody else listening comes back when we're actually planning on being open. We don't know when that is yet, but we hope it will be soon. And stay safe, and be sure you thank your third grade teachers. This tour was actually their idea, and we just kind of helped them out. So thank you for coming with us on our tour today.